our prescriptive concept of leadership. Hello, here Victor Marromo, your leadership lecturer. In this video, I will use 4 criteria to develop a definition of leadership that takes values into account. First, the definition must sufficiently resemble current cultural assumptions so that when feasible, one's normal understanding of what it means to lead will apply. Second, the definition should be practical so that practitioners can make use of it. Third, it should point toward socially useful activities. Finally, the concept should offer a broad definition of social usefulness. How might we go about defining the term leadership in a way that employs our current knowledge and the values associated with it? Leadership, which has long been linked to the exercise of authority or influence, usually suggests playing a prominent and coordinating role in an organization or society. To capture these uses of the term in a definition, we can use the word mobilize, which connotes motivating, organizing, orientating, and focusing attention. Rather than define leadership either as a position of authority in a social structure or as a personal set of characteristics, we may find it a great deal more useful to define leadership as an activity. This allows for leadership from multiple positions in a social structure. A president and a clerk can both lead. It also allows for the use of a variety of abilities depending on the demands of the culture and situation. Personal abilities are resources for leadership applied differently in different contexts. As we know, at times they are not applied at all. Many people never exercise leadership, even though they have the personal qualities we may commonly associate it. By unhinging leadership from personality traits, we permit observations of the many different ways in which people exercise plenty of leadership every day without being leaders. Said this, my fellow students, let's begin with the class of today. I hope that you find the class useful, and please, after seeing the class, go to your weekly activity. I will be pointing some reflections and things that you will have to complete. Said this, see you in the class.
The common personalistic orientation to the term leadership, with its assumption that leaders are born and not made, is quite dangerous. It fosters both self-delusion and irresponsibility. For those who consider themselves born leaders, free of an orienting philosophy and strategy of leadership, their grandiosity is a set-up for a rude awakening and for blindly doing damage. Minimally, they can waste the time and effort of a community on projects that go, if not over a cliff, then at least in circles. Conversely, those who consider themselves not leaders escape responsibility for taking action, or for learning how to take action when they see the need. In the face of critical problems, they say, "I'm not a leader. What can I do?" So we ought to focus on leadership as an activity, the activity of a citizen from any walk of life, mobilizing people to do something. But what is this socially useful something? What mode of leadership is likely to generate socially useful outcomes? Several approaches to these questions might work. We could imagine that a leader is more likely to produce socially useful outcomes by setting goals that meet the needs of both the leader and followers. This has the benefit of distinguishing leadership from merely getting people to do what you want them to do. Leadership is more than influence. Even so, setting a goal to meet the needs of the community may give no definition of what those needs are. If a leader personally wants to turn away from the difficulty of problems, and so do his constituents, does he exercise leadership by coming up with a fake remedy? To address this problem, the leadership theorist James McGregor suggested that usually useful goals not only have to meet the needs of followers, they also should elevate followers to a higher moral level. Calling this transformational leadership, he boasts that people begin with the need for survival and security, and once those needs are met, concern themselves with higher needs like affection, belonging, the common good, or serving others. This approach has the benefit of provoking discussion about how to construct a hierarchy of orienting values. However, a hierarchy that would apply across cultures and organization settings risks either being so general as to be impractical or so specific as to be culturally imperialistic in its application. We might also say that leadership has a high probability of producing socially useful results when defined in terms of legitimate authority, with legitimacy based on a set of procedures by which power is conferred from the many to the few. This view is attractive because we might stop glorifying usurpations of power as leadership, but by restraining the exercise of leadership to legitimate authority, we also leave no room for leadership that challenges the legitimacy of authority or the system of authorization itself. No doubt, there are risks to freeing leadership from its moorings of legitimate authority. To take one celebrated case, perhaps we risk encouraging committed zealots like Oliver North. Yet we also face an important possibility. Social progress may require that someone push the system to its limits. Perhaps Andrei Sarkov served such a role in the democratization of the former Soviet Union. Hence, a person who leads may have to risk his moral state, and not just his health and job, to protect his moral state. Defining leadership in terms of legitimate authority excludes those who face moral doubt and deep regret by defying authority. Václav Havel, Lech Walesa, Aung San Suu Kyi, Martin Luther King Jr., Margaret Sanger, Mohandas Gandhi, to name a few, risk social disaster by unleashing uncontrollable sociable forces. Business schools and schools of management commonly define leadership and its usefulness with respect to organizational effectiveness. Effectiveness means reaching viable decisions that implement the goals of the organization. This definition has the benefit of being generally applicable, but it provides no real guide to determine the natural formation of those goals. Which goals should we pursue? What constitutes effectiveness in addition to the ability to generate profits? From the perspective of a town official viewing a local corporation, effectiveness at implementation seems an insufficient criterion. A chemical plant may be quite effective at earning a profit, while it dangerously pollutes the local water supply. We are left with a question: effective at what? This study examines the usefulness of viewing leadership in terms of adaptive work. Adaptive work consists of the learning required to address conflicts in the values people hold, or to diminish the gap between the values people stand for and the reality they face. Adaptive work requires a change in values, beliefs, or behavior. The exposure and orchestration of conflict, internal contradictions within individuals and constituencies provide the leverage for mobilizing people to learn new ways. In this view, getting people to clarify what matters most, in what balance with what trade-offs, becomes a central task. In the case of a local industry that pollutes a river, people want clean water, but they also want jobs. Community and company interests frequently overlap and clash, with conflicts taking place not only among factions, but also within the lives of individual citizens who themselves may have competing needs. Leadership requires orchestrating these conflicts among and within the interested parties, and not just between the members and formal shareholders and stakeholders of the organization. Who should play a part in the deliberations is not a given, but is itself a critical strategy question. Strategy begins with asking which stakeholders have to adjust their ways to make progress on this problem. How can one sequence the issues or strengthen the bonds that join the stakeholders together as a community of interests so that they withstand the stresses of problem solving? To clarify a complex situation, such as this requires multiple vantage points, each of which adds a piece to the puzzle. Just as clarifying a vision demands reality testing is not a value-free process. Values are shaped and refined by rubbing against real problems, and people interpret their problems according to the values they hold. Different values shed light on the different opportunities and facets of a situation. The implication is important. The inclusion of competing value perspectives may be essential to adaptive success. In the long run, an industrial polluter will fail if it neglects the interests of its community. Given the spread of environmental values, it may not always be able to move across borders. Conversely, the community may lose its economic base if it neglects the interest of its industry. The point here is to provide a guide to goal formation and strategy. In selecting adaptive work as a guide, one considers not only the values that the goal represents, but also the goal's ability to mobilize people to face, rather than avoid, tough realities and conflicts. The hardest and most valuable task of leadership may be advancing goals and designing strategy that promote adaptive work. Does this forsake the image of leadership as a visionary activity? Not at all. It places emphasis on the act of giving clarity and articulation to a community guiding values, neither providing a map for the future that disregards value conflicts, nor providing an easy way out of the neglects. The facts will suffice for leadership. Guiding values are interpreted in the context of problems, demanding definition and action. People discover and respond to the future as much as they plan it. Those who lead have to learn from events and take advantage of the unplanned opportunities that events uncover. They have to improvise. In the midst of the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt called for bold, persistent experimentation. As he put it, it is common sense to take a method and try it. If it fails, admit it frankly and try another. But above all, try something new. As an example, to compare these frames of reference, we can use a case of Roosevelt's adversary, Adolf Hitler. When influence alone defines leadership, Hitler qualifies as an authentic and successful leader. He mobilized a nation to follow his vision. Indeed, he inspired millions of people to organize their lives by his word, even with the added criterion that goals have to meet the needs of both leader and follower. We would say that Hitler led. His many followers in Germany shared his goals. He was not simply forcing his sentiments and views on everyone. He reached office in part by articulating the pains and hopes of many people. Furthermore, by the standard of organizational effectiveness, Hitler exercised formidable leadership within hundreds of specific decision-making instances. Hitler succeeded in developing the effectiveness of German organizations. He set the goal of restoring the German economy, and for a period of time he succeeded. If we assume that leadership must not only meet the needs of followers, but also must elevate them, we render a different judgment. Hitler wielded power, but he did not lead. He played to people's basest needs and fears. If he inspired people toward the common good of Germany, it was the good of a truncated and exclusive society feeding off others. By the standard of legitimate authority, Hitler also does not qualify as a leader. Elected once by a plurality of Germans in 1933, he destroyed the nascent democratic political apparatus and maintained his political dominance through terror. By the criterion of adaptive work used here, we would also say that Hitler failed to exercise leadership, although dramatically mobilizing his society, both socially and economically. He did so primarily in the direction of avoiding tough realities, by providing illusions of grandeur, internal scapegoats, and external enemies. Hitler misdiagnosed Germany's ills and brought his nation to disaster. He exercised leadership no more than a charlatan practices medicine when providing fake remedies. There are several advantages to viewing leadership in terms of adaptive work. First, it points to the pivotal importance of reality testing in producing socially useful outcomes, the process of weighing one interpretation of a problem and its sources of evidence against others. Without this process, problems definitions fail to model the situation, causing distress. Conceptions of leadership that do not value reality testing encourage people to realize their vision, however faulty their sight. Thus Hitler's error was diagnostic as well as moral. To produce adaptive work, a vision must track the contours of reality. It has to have accuracy and not simply imagination and appeal. In addition, focusing on adaptive work allows us to evaluate leadership in process, rather than wait until the outcome is clear. We could have spotted Hitler's faulty reality testing early on. He gave plenty of clues. His election in 1933, based on a platform of exaltation and scapegoating, would have made us question the health of the problem-solving apparatus in the German society. Notwithstanding the appearance of legitimate authority flowing from a democratic elections, we would not have had to wait for the results of his efforts. Furthermore, in using this criterion of adaptive work, we need not impose our own hierarchy of human needs on the genuinely expressed needs of Germany at the time. In analyzing a community's response to hard realities, we would ask the following questions. Are its members testing their views of the problem against competing views within the community, or are they defensively sticking to a particular perspective and suppressing others? Are people testing seriously the relationship between means and ends? Are conflicts over values and the morality of various means open to examination? Are policies analyzed and evaluated to distinguish fact from fiction? In Nazi Germany, Hitler suppressed the competition among German perspectives. He established a norm of conformity that excluded the views that could test his vision of Germany's problems. Hence, Germany could not test the hypothetical relationship between current economic conditions and the citizenship of Jews. How establishing a land of free Jews would restore Germany was not subject to open scrutiny, either as a technical or moral prescription. Even in military operations, German policymakers lost the flexibility to respond to changed conditions. The ideal of will-produced decisions that disregarded complex circumstances. Working within the society's own frame of reference becomes particularly important in cases less obvious than Nazi Germany. For example, an international development consultant might plan a series of interventions into a foreign culture to assess that culture's objectives according to her own values may be dangerous, but she can help assess the quality of work without imposing her beliefs. She can evaluate the extent to which the culture fails to address the problems arising from the culture's own values and purposes. And perhaps more significantly is if she has any leverage, she may be able to help or push the society to do the hard work of clarifying its competing values and purposes, and of facing the painful trade-offs and adjustments required to narrow the gap between current conditions and processes. If the society bans certain parties, disenfranchises segments of the population, or uses torture and repression, what value perspective is obliterated among those being silenced? What aspects of reality that they see are being kept hidden? What might she do to encourage the factions of the culture to speed their own change of attitudes, habits, and beliefs? Because leadership affects many lives, the concept we use must be spacious. It has to allow for the values of various cultures and organizations. It cannot be imperialistic, yet we cannot beg the issue altogether by saying that leadership is value-free and define it simply in terms of its instruments, influence, formal powers, prominence, or personal resources, skills, bearing, temperament. Those who listen to us do more with what we say. They turn instruments and resources into values that orient their personal and professional lives. In this course, leadership is oriented by the task of doing adaptive work. As we shall see, influence and authority are primary factors in doing adaptive work, but they also bring constraints. They are instruments and not ends. Tackling tough problems, problems that often require an evolution of values, is the end of leadership. Getting that work done is its essence. Our societies and organizations clearly need leadership in the sense developed here. We are facing major adaptive changes and challenges in these tough times. We need a view of leadership that provides a practical orientation so that we can evaluate events and action in process without waiting for outcomes. We also need a governor on our tendencies to become arrogant and grandiose in our visions, to flee from harsh realities and the dailiness of leadership. Terms like transformational leadership fuel such grandiosity. Furthermore, as we shall see, a strategy of leadership to accomplish adaptive work accounts for several conditions and values that are constant with the demands of a democratic society. In addition, to reality testing. These include respecting conflict, negotiation, and a diversity of views within a community, increasing community cohesion, developing norms of responsibility, taking learning and innovation in mind, and keeping social distress with a variable range. Yet, this concept of leadership has potential drawbacks that require investigation and research. The word adaptation too readily connotes coping, as if one must passively submit to an unbending reality. It may often be true that there are unbending realities that we should face rather than avoid, but since much of social reality is a product of social arrangements, and physical reality has become increasingly amenable to technological impact and digital impact, there is obviously a great deal of plasticity to many of our realities, and we would do ourselves a disservice to adopt a coping relationship to them. In addition, because adaptation is a metaphor from biology, where the objective is survival, leadership as activity to mobilize adaptation may connote an overemphasis on survival. Clearly, we have a host of quite precious values: liberty, equality, human welfare, justice, and community, for which we take risks, and a concept of adaptation applied to human organizations and societies must account for this squarely. With these concerns in mind, we turn to a deeper examination of adaptive work. Said this, my fellow students, I hope that you enjoyed with the experience about the so-called leadership of Hitler, which it was not in our views here in the course and in our positive action leadership. So this we have finished for today. Please check up on your activity. It will be under the activity sections on your recipes. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Goodbye.